Hello everyone, I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So, if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The Shadow of Her Presence. My 23-year-old mother was taken from this world when I was just a baby. It happened in the house we lived in, and to this day, nobody knows the full truth about what actually occurred. Throughout my life, there have been moments where I've felt her nearby, almost as if her spirit lingers. In recent weeks, the sensation has been constant, wrapping around me like a quiet embrace. I have no recordings or photos to prove any of this, but I know she's there. She comes to me in dreams, her presence weaving its way into my nights as though she's watching over me. For a little context, her life was tragically cut short in 1998 when I was just 2 years old, the youngest of 3 children. I was the only one home when she passed. My dad, brother, and sister were away on a short trip. Perhaps that's why I feel her more strongly than my siblings do. Maybe when she left this world, she knew I was still in the house and stayed behind, unable to rest, as though determined to protect me. The house where my mom's life ended always felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of sorrow in its walls. From the time I was a child, I would occasionally see shadowy figures moving in the periphery of my vision. Though I never saw my mother herself, I often felt her presence, like a gentle hand brushing against my shoulder. 2 particular figures became familiar to me over the years. One was a hooded, shadowy mass, featureless, with no face or eyes, always appearing in the downstairs bedroom. The other was long and lanky, hunched, as if burdened by sadness. Sometimes I glimpsed 2 or 3 of these slouched figures at once, wandering quietly on the main floor of the house. Oddly enough, I never felt true fear when I saw them. It was as if they wanted me to notice them, to acknowledge their existence, yet they carried no malice. The hooded figure, however, was different. Its presence felt heavier, more foreboding. Though I avoided getting too close, I didn't sense direct harm, just a warning to keep my distance. Then there was the night I encountered something entirely different. Something that made me move my bedroom from upstairs to downstairs forever. I had awoken in the middle of the night to see a glowing apparition at the foot of my bed. His face was pale but distinct, his uniform from another era, perhaps the Civil War or colonial times. He looked directly at me and spoke in a low, commanding voice, saying only 2 words, "Get out." Chills crawled across my skin as I obeyed, relocating my sleeping space downstairs by the next morning. My brother's friend also had a chilling experience in the house, one that would stay with him for years. He used to spend hours hanging out in our basement, but one day he went into the small bathroom down there and came running out moments later, pale and shaking. He refused to go back and demanded that his parents pick him up immediately. For years, we didn't know what had happened. It was sentee until much later that he revealed he had seen a full-bodied apparition of an old man with a long, thick beard staring back at him from the bathroom mirror. That day was the last time he ever set foot in our home. When we eventually moved from that house, I thought I had left the shadows and ghosts behind. It's been 7 years since then, and though I haven't seen another apparition, I still feel my mother's presence in quiet moments, as though she travels with me from place to place. 2 years ago, however, an incident reminded me that some doors are best left unopened. My Nana came home one afternoon with a Ouija board she had purchased at a yard sale. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal, yet every story I've ever heard about Ouija boards told me one thing: Dan T messed with them. They unsettled me deeply, so I wanted no part in it. My Nana, on the other hand, didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. To her, it was just a harmless game, and she thought my brother, my cousin, and I could enjoy it together. She left the board on the dining room table for days before insisting I put it away. Reluctantly, I slid it under my bed, hoping to forget about it. But my brother and cousin young boys brimming with curiosity, were determined to try it out. No matter how many times I explained it wasn't TA game and could invite something we didn't understand, they wouldn't let it go. One evening after work, I had a creeping suspicion they had used the board without telling me. I checked under my bed, and sure enough, it was there. The uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger as I confronted them. At first, they denied it, but eventually, they admitted they had played with it. I asked if they had properly said goodbye to close the session. They said yes, but something in their eyes made me doubt them. That night, as I lay in bed, trying to drift off, a suffocating sense of being watched crept over me. My gaze fell on my closet doors. They were slightly ajar, leaving a narrow slice of darkness that seemed deeper than it should have been. A chill ran down my spine, and I turned over, forcing myself to ignore it. Hours later, I was jolted awake by a sudden, sharp blow to the back of my head. My heart raced as I froze in place, my mind grasping for an explanation. I was lying on my back, head fully supported by the pillow, yet it felt as though someone had hit me hard. Fear coursed through me as I listened to the creaking of the floorboards, soft, deliberate footsteps pacing around my bed. Paralyzed, I stayed still until I finally gathered the courage to grab my phone and flee to the living room. Shaking, I sat in a chair, tears streaking my face as I tried to calm down. The clock on my phone read 3:00 a.m. I called my boyfriend, now my husband, but he didn't pick up. I called him again and again, 15 or 20 times, before I gave up. Hours later, as dawn broke, my Nana stirred awake. I didn't tell her what had happened. She would have brushed it off, claiming I was imagining things. When my boyfriend finally called back, his voice was full of guilt and worry. He'd had his phone on silent and didn't hear my calls. He told me he would have come over immediately if he had known. Later that day, we drove to a junkyard and disposed of the Ouija board for good. From that moment on, the strange occurrences stopped. But I've never forgotten the lesson I learned that night. Some things, once invited, cannot easily be sent away. Ouija boards are not toys, and some doors should never be opened. Story 2. The breathing in the shadows. I've never considered myself someone who believes in ghosts. I've always been a rational thinker, someone who searches for logical explanations before jumping to conclusions. But after what's been happening in our new home, I'm starting to question everything I thought I knew. My wife and I recently moved into an old army house, the kind offered to active soldiers in our country at a very low price. Most of these homes were built in the 1960s or 1980s. Simple and sturdy, with a certain charm despite their age. Ours sits at the very back of a large section, perched on a hill that overlooks a dense native forest below. It's private, cozy, and seems perfect on the surface, with no close neighbors and a view that stretches endlessly into the trees. Yet from the moment we arrived, there's been a strange undertone to the place, subtle at first, then steadily growing into something I can't ignore. The first odd thing happened on a quiet afternoon. I was walking from the front door to my car when I heard a loud, metallic bang on the tin roof above me. It sounded as though something heavy, like a large acorn or small rock, it dropped onto the roof and rolled down its slope, finally landing in the branches of the tree in our front yard. I looked up, but saw no branches hanging over the house that could have dropped anything, and nothing fell to the ground after that sound. I even checked the tree to see if anything was caught in its limbs, but found nothing. It was strange, but I brushed it off and mentioned it to my wife later that evening as a curious little mystery. Another night, it was unbearably hot. The house had a stillness to it that made even the smallest sounds seem amplified. I had opened the living room windows to let in a breeze. Before heading to bed, I went around the house, locking up and closing the windows. My wife, standing in the doorway, watched me do it. As I finished, she called me outside to the backyard, to Stargazi, and we spotted the International Space Station gliding across the sky like a distant, glowing satellite. After a few minutes, we returned inside, and I sank into the couch. That's when I noticed the curtains in the living room swaying gently. Confused, I went over to check and found the windows wide open again. I know for certain I had locked them only moments earlier. My wife couldn't have done it. She's been outside with me the whole time. I asked her if she saw me close them, and she nodded, recalling the exact moment. We stood in silence for a few seconds, both unsettled, before I closed them again and pulled the curtains tight. It wasn't until a few weeks later that the truly frightening incident occurred. The one that made me realize something was deeply wrong. It was late at night, and my wife had already gone to bed. I stayed up, browsing on my phone, letting my eyelids grow heavy as the minutes ticked by. That's when I heard it, a faint, steady sound, almost like breathing. At first, I thought it was my wife, perhaps snoring softly beside me. But as I listened more intently, I realized the sound wasn't coming from her. It's coming from the far corner of the bedroom. Slow, deliberate breaths, deep and unsteady. My body went rigid with fear. I strained my ears, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my head. The sound continued, each inhale and exhale filling the silence of the room. I dared not move, convinced that if I shifted, whatever was in that corner would know I was awake. The seconds felt like hours. Finally, I reached over and gently shook my wife. Half asleep, she murmured something unintelligible until I whispered, "I think someone's in the house." That jolted her fully awake. She sat up quickly, eyes wide in the dim glow of the phone screen. Then she froze. "Do you hear it too?" I asked. She nodded silently. The fear that gripped us in that moment was unlike anything I have ever felt. Together, we turned on all the lights in the bedroom, then cautiously moved through the house, checking every door, every lock, every room. Nothing. Everything was as it should be, yet the memory of that heavy breathing lingered like a shadow in my mind. We didn't sleep well that night, lying awake for hours as the house settled around us with its usual creaks and groans. The next day, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps the sound had come from outside, carried in on the breeze, or maybe it was the heating system groaning in the night. But deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those things. The sound had been too close, too deliberate, too alive. Since then, there had been no more strange noises, no windows mysteriously opening, no breathing in the night. Yet the unease hasn't left me. Each evening, as darkness falls and the forest outside sways gently in the wind, I can't help but feel watched. It's as though the house itself remembers something I can't see. I've started to wonder if perhaps we're not alone here. Maybe the house carries echoes of those who came before us, or maybe something lingered after all these years, waiting for us to settle in before making its presence known. I try not to dwell on it, but each time I lie in bed and stare into that far corner of the room, I can't shake the memory of that sound, those deep, steady breaths that didn't belong to anyone I could see. Story 3, The Turning Doornob. It's strange how some moments stick with you forever, even when they make no sense. This happened not long ago, and though I still search for a rational explanation, none has come. That day began like any other. I went for a long walk to clear my head, letting the cool air and the gentle sound of rustling leaves calm my restless thoughts. When I returned, my key was already in hand as I approached the front door. For as long as I can remember, I've always dreaded static shocks from doorknobs, so before grabbing it, I gently brushed the tip of my finger against the handle, just to make sure. That's when the impossible happened. As soon as my finger touched the cold metal, the doorknob turned on its own, slowly, deliberately, as though someone on the other side was about to open the door for me. My heart leaped into my throat. I froze in place, unsure whether to bolt or fling the door wide open. Curiosity got the better of me. With my pulse pounding, I pushed the door inward, expecting to see someone there. But the entryway was empty. No sound, no movement, no person waiting for me. just the quiet stillness of the house. Trying to calm myself, I entered and set my bag down. The doorknob incident played over and over in my mind as I inspected it. On my side, the mechanism felt solid and sturdy. I even tried replicating what had just happened, gently brushing the knob to see if it would turn on its own again. Nothing on the inside. The knob was slightly looser, but from the outside, it felt firm and immovable unless intentionally turned. Whatever I had witnessed couldn't be explained by a loose latch or a draft. This house has always carried a peculiar weight. Since moving in, I've occasionally noticed shadows slipping past doorways in my peripheral vision, always just out of reach, impossible to catch when I turn my head. Small objects topple off shelves without reason, and doors creak open even after I've checked their latches. Friends have visited and, without prompting, commented on the strange vibe in the downstairs rooms. One even asked if we'd ever had the house blessed, which I brushed off with an awkward laugh. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the pattern. One evening, as I returned home and stepped through the threshold, my phone began playing a video I had paused hours earlier. The screen lit up and the sound echoed through the quiet space, as if triggered by my arrival. I stood there in the dim hallway, unease spreading through me. I couldn't shake the sensation that something unseen lingered in the house, watching, waiting, perhaps even trying to make its presence known in subtle ways. The incidents never felt aggressive, but they carried a heavy, inexplicable energy that kept me on edge. As much as I want to dismiss these moments as coincidences, they've begun to stack up in unsettling ways. The turning doorknob, the moving shadows, the strange electronic quirks that don't feel random anymore. It's as if the house breathes around me, testing boundaries, curious about my reactions. Sometimes I wonder if I'm alone in here at all, or if I share the space with something that existed long before I came. I've told myself countless times that ghosts aren't real, that there is always a logical explanation if I look hard enough. But each night, as the lights dim and the creaks in the walls begin their song, I feel the weight of unseen eyes. The air grows still, and my ears strain for sounds that shouldn't be there. That's when the memory of the doorknob turning creeps back in, chilling me to the bone. I've started leaving lights on at night, a small comfort against the unknown. Sometimes I sit in the living room for hours, staring at the door, waiting to see if the knob will turn again. It never does. Whatever force caused it that day seems content to remain in the shadows now, leaving me to question my sanity in silence. There are moments when I think about leaving, packing my belongings, and finding a place with no history, no lingering energy. But something about this house holds me here, rooted in its strange grip. Perhaps I'm waiting for answers, or perhaps I'm already too intertwined with whatever shares these walls to walk away. For now, I remain. Each day, I try to convince myself the house is just a house, that doors don't move on their own, and shadows are nothing more than tricks of light. But in the quiet hours, as I lie awake and listen to the creaking floors, I can't help but wonder what might be waiting just beyond the door, its hand on the knob, ready to turn it once again. Story 4. The Shadow at Wia Falls. I've always respected the unseen world, even if I don't claim to understand it. Growing up in Hawaii, I was taught that there are spirits in certain places, sacred grounds where the old ways still breathe quietly beneath the surface. That belief stayed with me into adulthood, even as I pursued a career in the film industry. Sometimes we shoot in places steeped in history, places that once belonged to the ancestors. And though I've always tried to be mindful, not everyone around me shares that caution. It was late one evening when we wrapped up filming at Wia Falls, one of Oahu's most beautiful yet storied locations. The waterfall and its surrounding trails are lush and serene, but locals know its history is rich with tales of the supernatural. The air feels different there, as though the wind carries voices from a time long past. As the crew packed up equipment, someone realized a few items had been left behind near the falls. Without thinking, I volunteered to retrieve them, eager to finish the day. The sun had long since set, and the trail to the falls was cloaked in darkness. I took a colleague with me for company, and we rode a four-wheeler up the narrow path that twisted through the dense forest. The only light came from the vehicle's high beams, which cut through the blackness in a sharp cone. As we reached the falls, we dismounted and began searching. The sound of rushing water was soothing, but there was a heaviness in the air, like unseen eyes following our every move. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just fatigue. After several minutes of searching in vain, an uneasy feeling settled into my stomach. Something didn't feel right. The forest around us seemed unusually quiet, the usual chirps and rustling leaves absent. I looked at my colleague and could tell he felt it too. Without saying much, we decided to leave the missing equipment behind and return to camp. As we prepared to depart, my colleague adjusted his gear while I kept my gaze fixed on the road ahead. That's when I saw it. Standing in the middle of the path, directly illuminated by the four-wheeler's headlights, was a shadowy figure. At first, I thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I blinked, rubbed my face, and looked again. It was still there. 10 feet away, unmoving, its form human but featureless, as though carved from the darkness itself. Panic gripped me, but I didn't want to alarm my colleague. Slowly, I shut my eyes, hoping the figure would vanish when I opened them again. It didn't. Instead, it seemed closer now, though I hadn't heard a single step. The air grew cold, and I felt the hairs on my arms rise. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to speak calmly, urging my colleague to hurry. He looked up at me, confused, but didn't question it. As the four-wheeler roared to life and we started down the trail, I kept my eyes forward, refusing to glance back. My mind raced with questions I couldn't bring myself to ask. Was it a guardian spirit, upset at our intrusion? Or something else entirely, lingering in the forest long after nightfall? I whispered a quiet prayer of apology under my breath, hoping the entity would accept it and let us leave in peace. When we finally returned to the well-lit base camp, I felt the oppressive weight lift from my shoulders. My colleague asked what was wrong, but I shook my head and said nothing. That night, I replayed the moment in my mind, searching for any rational explanation, but there was none. The figure I had seen wasn't an animal, wasn't a trick of the light. I had been standing there, watching us. Even now, I can't be sure what I encountered that night. Some say spirits grow restless when sacred places are disturbed. Perhaps it was simply a warning, a reminder to tread lightly where others have walked for centuries. I'm grateful it didn't follow me home, but I'll never forget the chill in the air, the silence of the forest, and the shadow that stood where no human should have been. If I learned anything that night, it's this. Not every place is meant for us. Sometimes the unseen world lets us know exactly where we stand. Story 5. The heavy footsteps in the trailer. It was the winter of 1992 when my parents were relocated to Austin, Texas. Both were in the military, and though they expected housing on base, there were delays that left them stranded. To tide them over, they were placed in temporary housing. My mother was horrified when she first saw it, a rickety, double-wide tin trailer that felt like it had been forgotten by time. The place was musty and dated, plagued with drafts, roaches, and rodents. The windows leaked, and the thin walls struggled to hold in any heat. It wasn't a home, it was a shelter, just barely. My father's commute to the base was over an hour each way, leaving my mother alone most nights. At first, she tried to settle into the rhythm of the place, reading books in the dim glow of the living room lamp, keeping the television low for background noise. But the nights were long, and the house seemed to groan in ways that felt too deliberate. It was as though the walls were sighing around her, breathing in her presence. One evening, after an especially exhausting day, my mother decided she wouldn't wait up for my father. She got ready for bed early, brushed her hair in silence, and turned on the hallway light so my dad could find his way easily when he came home. She switched off her bedside lamp, sank into the creaking mattress, and let out a weary sigh as she closed her eyes. The silence pressed in around her, so absolute that she could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. And then came the sound. It was faint at first, a soft shuffle, like slippers dragging across the linoleum floor. My mother's eyes flew open. She held her breath, listening. The sound grew louder, and her stomach clenched with dread. It wasn't my father. She would have heard his truck pull into the driveway. She would have heard the key in the door. These footsteps were slow and deliberate, accompanied by the faint scraping of a heel sliding lazily across the floorboards. She remained still, her back to the bedroom door as the sound entered the hallway, her ears strained to catch every detail. The footsteps wandered down the hall, unhurried, growing closer and closer until they stopped just outside the bedroom. My mother's heart hammered in her chest as the air seemed to grow colder, heavier. Then, without warning, she felt the edge of the bed sink slightly, as if someone had sat down. There was no sound, no voice, no visible figure, only the weight pressing against the mattress beside her. For a moment, time seemed to stretch endlessly. My mother forced herself to breathe evenly, willing her trembling body to remain calm. Slowly, she sat up, her eyes darting to the empty space at the foot of the bed. The hallway light spilled faintly into the room, casting long shadows that seemed to shift with an unseen presence. Summoning every ounce of courage, she slipped out of bed, her feet barely making a sound on the cold floor. Without looking back, she walked briskly to the door, flipped on the hallway light, and stepped out into the trailer's narrow corridor. Her hand shook as she closed the bedroom door behind her. That night, she didn't return to bed. Instead, she curled up on the worn-out couch in the living room, clutching a throw blanket tightly around her shoulders as she stared at the flickering television screen until dawn. For the rest of their stay in that trailer, nothing else happened. No more footsteps, no more strange weight sinking into the mattress. After 2 months, my parents finally moved into their permanent housing, leaving the drafty old trailer behind. My mother never spoke of that night again, not to my father, not to anyone. But years later, when she recounted the story to me in hushed tones, I could still hear the tremor in her voice, see the way her eyes clouded with unease. To this day, she swears she was awake, fully aware of every detail, every sound. And though she never saw who or what sat beside her on that bed, she knows in her heart that she wasn't alone. Some places, she says, carry the memories of those who came before. And some of those memories walk the halls long after the living have moved on. Story 6. The knocking at the door John was the kind of man who didn't frighten easily. Growing up surrounded by Native American traditions, he had learned to respect spirits in the unseen world. He understood that there were things beyond our understanding, but he never let them scare him. When he moved into his new house, there was something about it that felt different, not threatening, just off. The air seemed heavier, and the shadows clung to the corners a little too long. Still, he brushed it aside and focused on settling in, eager to build a home. The first week passed uneventfully, but John couldn't shake the subtle sense of being watched. He'd catch himself glancing over his shoulder while sitting in the living room, scanning the dim hallways for movement that wasn't there. One quiet evening, as he lounged in his chair with the television muted, a firm knock sounded at the front door. It wasn't frantic or loud, just a steady, deliberate knock that echoed through the stillness of the house. John frowned and got up, his steps measured as he made his way to the door. When he opened it, the front porch was empty. The yard stretched out into the night, silent and untouched. There were no cars passing, no footsteps retreating. His driveway was a dead end, and his nearest neighbors were a 3-minute walk away. Puzzled, he stepped outside, peering into the darkness. The air was cool and still. He shut the door and went back to his chair, chalking it up to kids playing a prank, though he didn't believe that explanation himself. Moments later, the knock came again. The same deliberate rhythm, as if Whoever, or whatever it was, hadn't moved from its spot. This time, John walked to the door quickly and swung it open, determined to catch whoever was there. Again, nothing. The porch was bare, and the quiet of the night pressed in around him. He sighed, more irritated than scared, and closed the door. But before he could even let go of the doorknob, the knocking came a third time, sharp and insistent. The sound reverberated through the wood beneath his hand. John froze, staring at the door as the knock echoed in his ears. He gritted his teeth and flung the door open again, his eyes darting across the empty lawn. There was no one, no figure darting away, no shadows shifting where they shouldn't be. It's time. John didn't bother closing the door right away. He stood in the doorway, breathing in the crisp night air, straining to hear anything. Footsteps, laughter, the sound of retreating movement. The world remained silent. Frustrated, he stepped onto the porch, his eyes sweeping across the lawn and into the darkness beyond. "If you don't stop this right now, I'm going to catch you," he called into the night. His voice felt small against the vast stillness. For a few moments, the only sound was the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. John lingered there, staring into the void until his irritation dulled into unease. Finally, he stepped back inside, shutting the door firmly behind him. This time, there was no knock. The silence that followed felt heavier somehow, as though the house itself was holding its breath. John never experienced the knocking again after that night. Whatever it was, it didn't return. But in the weeks that followed, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't been alone. The house seemed quieter, almost watchful, as though waiting for something. Even the shadows in the corners felt more alive, shifting ever so slightly when he wasn't looking. He never told anyone about the knocking, not because he was embarrassed, but because he didn't want to give voice to the unsettling thought that maybe he hadn't imagined it. John continued to live in the house for years, and though he never heard those deliberate knocks again, he never forgot the sound of them, firm, patient, almost human. To this day, he wonders what would have happened if he hadn't opened the door that third time. Story 7. The Dreamcatcher's warning Sasha had never been one for superstition. She believed in logic, in the tangible, and in things she could see and touch. But after the breakup, she needed to move fast. And when a friend told her about a landlord with a double-wide trailer for rent, she jumped at the chance. It wasn't perfect, but it was spacious, and it felt like a fresh start. As she signed the paperwork and collected the keys, she couldn't have known what was waiting for her behind that front door. The trailer was surprisingly well kept. She stepped inside to find a large living room with an open kitchen and a counter bar connecting to the dining space. It wasn't the life she had envisioned, but it was something she could make her own. Moving box by box, she began sorting her belongings into the assigned rooms. Okay, that's when she saw it, something odd hanging on the wall of the master bedroom. Okay. At first glance, she thought it was just an old decoration left by a previous tenant. Okay. As she got closer, her stomach turned. Crudely made from frayed yarn and covered in cobwebs. Plastic beads were strung haphazardly through its knotted loops. And dangling from the bottom was something far worse, a dried chicken-ass foot tied with string. Sasha recoiled, her lip curling in disgust. "Gross," she muttered, yanking it down and tossing it into the trash without another thought. That night, she didn't stay in the trailer. She still had to travel between her old home and her parents' house, where a dog was waiting while she finished the move. But after a few days of back and forth, everything was finally in place. It was her first full evening in the new space, and she was determined to make it feel like home. She cooked a simple meal, unpacked the last few boxes, and set up her bedroom so it felt cozy. By the time she glanced at the clock, it was already 2:30 a.m. With her dog curled at her feet in the soft glow from her phone screen, she settled into bed. The house was quiet, save for the occasional groan of the old trailer settling in the cool night air. She felt herself drifting off, but then her dog tensed beside her. He sat up, ears erect, staring intently at the open bedroom door. Sasha frowned and followed his gaze into the darkness. The hair on her arms prickled as she realized she could hear something faint, soft, rhythmic thudding, like small footsteps on the living room floor. Her breath caught. She lived alone. The doors were locked. The windows were sealed. Yet the sound persisted, slow and deliberate. And then it changed. The footsteps sped up, pounding down the hallway toward her room. Her dog growled low in his throat, his hackles raised, but he didn't move from her side. Sasha sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the dark doorway. The footsteps stopped abruptly just outside her bedroom. For a moment, the silence felt deafening. Then came the giggle. It was soft at first, like the laugh of a small child, but it sent a wave of icy fear rushing through her veins. The giggling grew louder, darting away down the hallway before stopping again. Sasha's heart hammered in her chest as adrenaline surged through her. Enough, she whispered to herself. In one swift motion, she jumped out of bed, slammed the door shut, and shoved her dresser across it for good measure. She sat awake until morning, her back against the wall, staring at the blocked door. When sunlight finally filtered through the blinds, she summoned the courage to venture out. The house was quiet again, almost too quiet. She walked into the living room and froze. Tiny handprints dotted the glass of her windows, small, childlike impressions smudged into the condensation. That afternoon, Sasha called a friend who knew a woman who performed house cleansings with sage and prayer. She arrived later that day, calmly moving through each room, muttering words of protection under her breath. When the ritual was complete, the heavy air seemed to lift, replaced by a stillness that felt cleaner somehow. Sasha never heard the footsteps or the giggling again. To this day, though, she wonders if the dream catcher, the ugly, cobweb thing with the chicken's foot, wasn't meant to harm her, but to keep something at bay. Maybe it had been holding back the darkness that now prowled her halls. Maybe, in throwing it out, she had unwittingly invited it in. Story 8. The corner of the room. When I first met my wife, I never imagined I'd be sharing stories like this. It feels strange even now to recount those nights in her house. A house that seemed ordinary on the surface, but hid something unsettling deep within its walls. Back then, I didn't believe in ghosts. I considered myself a skeptic, someone who dismissed hauntings as superstition or overactive imaginations. But what I experienced in that home changed me forever. The house itself was charming in an old-fashioned way, with creaky floors and corners that always seemed a little too dark. My wife had lived there for a decade before I came into her life. She warned me early on about its history, speaking in hushed tones about strange occurrences she and her children had endured. Friends of hers wouldn't stay over after witnessing figures in the shadows. Even her kids, when they were younger, would point to the same corner of the living room and ask, "Who is that lady?" I brushed it off. Children see things in their imagination, and old houses make strange noises, I told myself. Still, there was something about the corner of the living room they always pointed to. It seemed colder there, somehow heavier. Her stories about unexplainable smells, soft whispers in the night, and that constant unnerving feeling of being watched, those were easy enough for me to rationalize. But then came the psychic visit. At my wife's urging, she invited a local paranormal investigator to the house. He brought along a psychic, a woman who walked through the home in silence before stopping in the living room. Her demeanor changed instantly as she turned toward the corner. Without prompting, she said, "This is where she lingers." A woman who ended her life here still remains. My wife's face went pale, but the psychic wasn't finished. She sketched a quick drawing of what she claimed to see. A woman with hollow eyes and a sorrowful expression, fading into darkness. That drawing is still folded in a drawer somewhere, a quiet reminder of what we learned that day. I tried to act unfazed, even joking about sleeping in that very corner. My logical mind couldn't accept that an apparition could hold power over our lives. When I moved in, I placed our bed in that same corner, almost daring whatever resided there to make itself known. The first few nights passed uneventfully, and I began to think it was all in everyone else's heads. But on the fourth night, the scratching began. At first, it was faint, soft, rhythmic sounds coming from within the wall near my wife's side of the bed. I paused my late-night writing and turned, ears straining. The sound stopped as soon as I moved. Shaking off the unease, I closed my laptop and slid under the covers. But sleep didn't come easily that night. A few nights later, I woke suddenly to find myself standing in the kitchen in complete darkness. My wife stood at the doorway, her face etched with concern. "What are you doing down here?" she whispered. Kay stared at her, confused, my mind struggling to catch up. "I think I was sleepwalking," I stammered, but I'd never sleptwalked before in my life. She guided me gently back to bed, her arm warm around mine. The following night, it happened again. This time, my wife woke to find me standing on the bed, facing the corner, my body perfectly still. She called my name softly, and when I didn't answer, her voice grew louder. Finally, I blinked and turned toward her, disoriented. "Come back to bed," she whispered, her hands shaking as she pulled me down. By the next morning, we moved the bed out of that corner. Neither of us wanted to sleep there another night. Since then, the scratching has stopped, and I haven't sleepwalked again. 6 years have passed, and we still avoid that part of the room. Even now, I wonder if placing our bed there invited something into my dreams, something that pulled me into its space when my defenses were down. I no longer call myself a skeptic. Can't. Not after what I felt standing in the darkness of that kitchen. Not after what my wife saw that night on the bed. Some corners of the world aren't meant to be disturbed. Some spirits don't want company. And some memories, whether they belong to the living or the dead, never fade. Story 9. The man behind the curtain. I grew up in a small, quiet town where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. Our house was a modest 2-story structure with creaky wooden floors and thin walls that seemed to echo every sound. My parents worked long hours, often leaving me and my older brother alone in the evenings. It never bothered me much until the night I realized we weren't truly alone. It started with small things. I'd be sitting in the living room, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd see movement upstairs. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination or the play of headlights through the curtains. But one night, as I was reading quietly on the couch, I saw it more clearly. A shadowy figure standing at the top of the stairs, watching silently before retreating out of sight. My heart pounded, but when I called out to my brother, he didn't answer. He wasn't even home. I tried to tell myself I was tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. There was one curtain in particular, an old, faded thing that covered a window in the hallway upstairs. Sometimes I swore I saw it shift ever so slightly, as if someone were peeking out from behind it. One night, my parents were working late again, and my brother had gone to a friend's house. I was sitting on my bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard faint footsteps on the stairs. They were slow and deliberate, creaking with each step. My breath caught in my throat as the sound grew louder, closer. The hallway light was off, and the only glow came from the screen in my hand. I didn't dare move. Then, the footsteps stopped. The house fell silent for a moment before I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I couldn't make out the words. It came from the hallway, near the curtain. Summoning every ounce of courage, I tiptoed to my door and peered out. The curtain swayed gently, though there was no breeze. My chest tightened as I caught a glimpse of what lay behind it. A pale hand, long and thin, gripped the edge of the fabric. My stomach dropped. I slammed my door shut and pressed my back against it, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I grabbed my phone and called my brother, my hands trembling. "Kay, he answered groggily, annoyed at being disturbed. When I told him what I'd seen, his voice dropped low. "Don't open the door," he said firmly. "I'll be home in 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes felt like hours. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching a baseball bat and staring at the door. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Finally, I heard the familiar sound of my brother's key in the lock. I sprinted out to meet him, tears streaming down my face. Together, we searched the house from top to bottom. The curtain hung still now, lifeless in the dim light. There was nothing behind it, no pale hand, no shadowy figure. We never told our parents what happened. My brother and I refused to be home alone again. We avoided the upstairs hallway whenever we could, and I began keeping my bedroom door locked. Even years later, I can still see that hand in my mind's eye, fingers curling around the curtain's edge, as if waiting for the right moment to pull it back. Some nights, I dream of that house. Hear the creak of footsteps on the stairs, the soft rustle of fabric, and that whisper that never quite forms words. And when I wake, I swear I can still feel the weight of unseen eyes watching from the darkest corners of my room. Story 10. The Girl in the Mirror. The first time I saw her, I thought it was just a trick of the light. It was late, and I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom before bed. The mirror above the sink was slightly fogged from a warm shower earlier, and the overhead bulb flickered softly, casting odd shadows on the walls. As I leaned forward to spit, something in the reflection caught my eye. A faint outline of a girl stood behind me. She was small, maybe 10 or 11 years old, with long, stringy hair and a pale face that seemed impossibly still. Her eyes were dark pools, fixed directly on mine through the glass. My heart skipped a beat, and I spun around so fast I nearly slipped on the tiled floor. The bathroom was empty. Only the quiet hum of the vent greeted me. I told myself I was tired, that my brain was misfiring after a long day. But as I wiped the mirror clean, I noticed faint smudges, tiny handprints, far too small to be mine. I stared at them for a long time, my stomach twisting into knots. With a shaking hand, I grabbed a towel and scrubbed them away until the glass gleamed. For a few nights, nothing happened. I started to relax, convincing myself it had been a stress-induced hallucination. But one evening, as I prepared for bed, I caught movement in the mirror again. This time, I didn't turn around. I froze, my toothbrush clutched tightly as I watched her. The girl's head tilted slightly to one side, as though she was studying me with silent curiosity. Her lips parted, and though no sound escaped, I saw them form a single word: stay. My blood ran cold. I forced myself to blink, and when I opened my eyes again, she was gone. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the house sending my heart into overdrive. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of her standing in front of the mirror, reaching out toward me with those small, pale hands. Her eyes seemed endless, pulling me in like a whirlpool. Over the next few weeks, her appearances grew more frequent. Sometimes I'd see her in the corner of my bedroom mirror. Other times, I'd catch her reflection in the black screen of my television, always silent, always staring. I started covering mirrors with blankets, but somehow I could still feel her eyes on me, even without glass to hold her image. One night, I awoke to the sound of faint tapping. It was rhythmic, deliberate, coming from the direction of my dresser. My heart pounding, I sat up and squinted through the darkness. It's the mirror on top of the dresser, one I had forgotten to cover. It's vibrating slightly, as though something inside it wanted out. And then I heard her voice for the first time. It was no louder than a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. It let me in. I don't remember much after that. When morning came, I found the mirror shattered, spiderweb cracks running across its surface. Tiny handprints smudged the shards. Since then, I've avoided mirrors as much as I can. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear soft tapping and a voice so faint it's almost part of the air. And deep down, I know she's still there, waiting for me to slip, to let her through. Story 11. The Whispering Woods. Growing up in the countryside, I had always loved the woods behind our house. They stretched endlessly, filled with towering oaks and pines that swayed gently in the wind. As kids, my brother and I would spend hours out there, building forts, pretending to hunt for treasure, and exploring trails that seemed to twist and change every time we walked them. But as I got older, I stopped venturing so far in. There was a stillness in those woods that began to unsettle me. It wasn't until I was 17 that I understood why. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, enjoying the cool breeze and scrolling through my phone. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the woods were cloaked in darkness except for the faint glow of fireflies. That's when I heard it, soft whispers drifting through the air. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me. I tilted my head, listening closer. The sound was faint but distinct, words spoken in a hushed tone, too low for me to understand. Goosebumps rose on my arms as I realized it was coming from deep within the woods. I stood, peering into the darkness, trying to catch movement between the trees. "Hello?" I called out nervously, my voice cracking. The whispers stopped. The woods fell silent, heavy with an eerie stillness that made my stomach twist. I turned to go inside, but before I could reach the door, the whispers started again, closer this time. It sounded like multiple voices now, overlapping in a soft, urgent murmur. I couldn't make out the words, but they sent chills racing down my spine. Against my better judgment, I stepped off the porch, walking slowly toward the edge of the woods. "Is someone there?" I asked. No response, only the whispers, beckoning me deeper. As I reached the tree line, the air grew colder. The darkness seemed thicker here, as if the night itself had weight. I took another step forward, and that's when I saw them, shapes moving between the trees that were pale and indistinct, like mist swirling in the moonlight. My breath caught in my throat as one of the shapes seemed to turn toward me, though it had no face. "Come closer," a voice whispered, clear as day now. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It was everywhere at once. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward. "No," I said firmly, my voice trembling. "I don't want to." The shapes froze. For a brief moment, the air felt lighter, as if the woods were holding their breath. Then, without warning, the voices rose in a crescendo, louder and more urgent, overlapping in a chaotic chorus. "Come closer," they screamed. I bolted for the house, my legs pumping as fast as they would go. I didn't stop until I was inside with the door locked behind me. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the wood, the whispers still echoing faintly in my ears. That night, I slept with the lights on, too afraid to even glance out the window. I've never gone back to those woods. Even now, years later, I can still hear those voices when the wind blows just right, soft, persistent, calling me to return. And though part of me wonders what might have happened if I'd stepped further in, a stronger part of me is grateful I never found out. Story 12. The Old Hotel Room. I never liked staying in hotels. There's something about sleeping in a space that's held countless strangers before you, people with unknown stories, unknown energies that always unsettled me. But on a business trip 2 years ago, I didn't have a choice. The company booked a last-minute room in an old downtown hotel that had seen better days. Its faded carpets, dim yellow lighting, and heavy wooden doors made it feel more like a relic of a bygone era than a place of rest. When I checked in, the receptionist gave me an odd look. "You're in room 616, she said softly. Her voice carried an undertone I couldn't place. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call the front desk." I brushed it off as standard courtesy, but her uneasy smile lingered in my mind as I rode the creaking elevator up to the 6th floor. The hallway smelled faintly of mildew, and the air felt colder than the lobby below. My room was at the very end of the corridor, and as I approached, I noticed something strange. The door to 616 seemed slightly off-kilter in its frame, as if it had been forced open and hastily repaired. A chill ran down my spine as I slid the keycard and pushed the door open. The room was ordinary enough: a queen-size bed, a small desk, and a large mirror facing the window. But the atmosphere felt heavy, almost oppressive. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was tired from travel. After unpacking, I took a quick shower and collapsed onto the bed. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of faint scratching. At first, I thought it was coming from the window, but as I sat up, my ears strained to pinpoint the sound. It wasn't the window. It was coming from the mirror. I froze. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, as though fingernails were dragging across the glass. My heart raced as I stared at my reflection, expecting, no, dreading, to see something behind me. But the reflection showed only the room, empty, and then it stopped. I let out a shaky breath, laughing nervously at myself. "You're imagining things," I muttered, lying back down. But just as sleep began to take me, a soft voice whispered in my ear, "Get out." My eyes flew open. The air felt ice cold, and I could see my breath fogging in the dim light. I bolted upright and looked around wildly, but the room was still empty. The voice had been so clear, so close. My body screamed at me to leave, but exhaustion and fear kept me rooted to the bed. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I checked out early. As I handed my key to the receptionist, she avoided my eyes. "Room 616, she murmured. "You're not the first." When I pressed her for more, she only shook her head and muttered, "Some rooms hold on to things, okay? And some things don't like letting go." I've stayed in dozens of hotels since then, but never again in one so old, so heavy with history. Even now, I avoid mirrors in unfamiliar places, because sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear that whisper, soft, insistent, telling me to leave. Story 13. The crying baby in the walls. I never believed in ghosts. Even after moving into that old house, I thought all the creaks and groans were just the natural sounds of aging wood and pipes. But there was one sound I couldn't explain, one that turned my skepticism into a quiet, lingering fear. It began a few weeks after we settled in. At night, when the world outside was silent, and my husband had drifted off to sleep beside me, I started hearing it, a faint, muffled crying. At first, I thought it was a neighborhood child, their cries slipping through the open window on the breeze. But when I got up to check, the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from within the walls. I pressed my ear to the cold plaster, heart pounding. The crying grew louder, just enough to make out that it was the sound of a baby, the sobs rhythmic and pitiful. It sent a chill down my spine. There was no reason for a baby to be in our walls. We had no children, and the house had been empty for years before we bought it. The next day, I told my husband about it. He chuckled and said, "Old houses make weird noises, probably just pipes rattling." I wanted to believe him, but that night, the crying returned, louder, more desperate. I could almost hear tiny hands scratching, as if the child was trying to claw its way out. I barely slept. In the morning, I called the previous owner, an elderly woman who had lived there for decades. Her voice cracked when I mentioned the crying. After a long pause, she said softly, "You shouldn't have torn down the nursery." My stomach dropped. I had no idea what she meant. "We didn't tear anything down," I said. "The house came as is." She only muttered something I couldn't quite catch and hung up. That evening, I scoured the house, searching for any clue. In the attic, I found a small door tucked behind some old insulation. It led to a crawl space filled with dust and cobwebs. As I stepped inside, the crying grew louder, echoing all around me. My flashlight beam landed on a rotting wooden cradle shoved into the corner. The cradle rocked gently, though there was no draft. My breath caught as I stepped closer. Inside was a small, tattered blanket, stained and stiff with age. Beneath it, scratched into the wood, were the words, "I'm still here." I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The crying had stopped, replaced by silence, so heavy it seemed to press against my chest. I fled the attic, slamming the door behind me. That night, I packed a bag and left. To this day, I don't know if what I heard was real or some strange imprint left by a tragedy long before my time. But sometimes, late at night, I wake to phantom cries in my ears, and no matter where I am, I can still hear the soft creak of that cradle rocking in the dark. Story 14. The man at the window. When I was a child, my bedroom faced the backyard. It wasn't anything special, just a patch of grass, a few old trees, and a rickety wooden fence that separated our property from the neighbors. But I hated that room. There was something about the window that always made me uneasy, especially at night. It started when I was 8 years old. One evening, as I was climbing into bed, I glanced at the window and froze. Outside, illuminated by the faint glow of the porch light, was the silhouette of a man. He stood motionless, facing my room, his head tilted slightly, as if he was studying me. I screamed, and my father came running. By the time he reached my room, the man was gone. My dad searched the yard and found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had been there. He told me it was probably my imagination, that the shadows can play tricks on tired eyes, but I knew what I saw. The next night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep with the curtains open. I pulled them shut tight, leaving only a small gap near the bottom. Just as I was drifting off, I heard a soft tapping sound. My eyes snapped open. It was coming from the window. Stayed frozen in bed, staring at the gap in the curtains. Slowly, carefully, I leaned over and peeked through the opening. My heart nearly stopped. There he was again, the same man, standing in the exact same spot. His face was pale, his features just visible enough in the dim light to make out dark, hollow eyes and a faint, unsettling smile. I yanked the curtains closed and buried myself under the covers, shaking. The tapping continued for what felt like hours before it finally stopped. After that, I refused to sleep in that room. My parents, frustrated by what they thought were childish fears, tried everything to comfort me, but nothing helped. Eventually, they allowed me to switch rooms with my brother, whose window faced the street instead of the backyard. Years passed. We moved out of that house when I was 13. I thought I'd left the fear behind, but a few months ago, I stumbled across an old newspaper article online. It was about a man who had lived 2 streets over from our old house. A man arrested for peering into children's windows late at night. The accompanying photo made my blood run cold. It was him, the man at my window. To this day, I don't know if he ever planned to do more than watch. But sometimes, late at night, I hear soft tapping sounds outside my window. And every time, I find myself too afraid to look. Story 15. The Last Passenger. Years ago, I worked as a night shift taxi driver in a small city. The streets were usually quiet after midnight, and I'd spend hours cruising through empty neighborhoods, picking up the occasional late-night worker or partycore. Most nights were uneventful until the night I picked up her. It was around 2:30 a.m. when I saw her standing on the corner beneath a flickering street lamp. She was wearing a pale dress that seemed outdated, like something from the 1950s, and her long, dark hair hung in loose waves over her shoulders. She raised her hand slowly as I approached, her expression calm but unreadable. I pulled over, and she climbed into the back seat without a word. Her skin was pale, almost too pale, and her eyes were dark and deep-set. "Where to?" I asked, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. She looked directly into my eyes and said softly, "Home." There was something strange about her tone, but I didn't question it. Instead, I began driving aimlessly through the streets, waiting for her to give me more specific directions. The car was silent, except for the low hum of the engine. Every now and then, I caught a reflection in the mirror, her gaze fixed on me, unblinking. After what felt like 20 minutes, I spoke up. "Miss, can you tell me where home is?" She didn't answer. A chill crept over me as I realized the temperature in the cab had dropped. I could see my own breath fogging in the air, though the heater was running. Glancing in the mirror again, I froze. The back seat was empty. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. The cab was silent, the only sound my own panicked breathing. The seatbelt in the back was still buckled, as if she had never been there at all. When I finally gathered the courage to drive again, I headed straight to the company lot and parked the cab for the night. I never told anyone what happened, not my coworkers, not my friends, not even my family. But sometimes, late at night, I still drive past that street lamp, okay? And every now and then, I swear I see her standing there again, waiting for someone to take her home.